Once you see this evidence, you'll never watch the show the same way again. Rick hasn't just been ruining Morty's life by accident, he's been running a full-scale psychological experiment on the kid from day one, and it's working. Recently uncovered files from Rick's private databases reveal proof of something way darker than random trauma. We're talking engineered emotional collapse, calculated memory wipes, and a project literally called Behavioral Modification Protocol. And here's the kicker. It's not just about controlling Morty, it's about rebuilding the kid into something else entirely. This isn't a theory, it's all documented in Rick's own words. Look, we know how this sounds. Oh, another conspiracy theory about Rick and Morty. But trust us, you'll wish this analysis was wrong. The evidence suggests Rick's methods go far beyond simple neglect or even standard abuse patterns. The thing is, everyone talks about the cycle of abuse, right? Tension builds, explosion happens, reconciliation, then calm. Rinse and repeat. But what if the data shows Rick's been running a modified version of this cycle, one specifically designed not just to control Morty, but to systematically destroy who the kid used to be and rebuild him into something else? Analysis of their adventures through this psychological lens reveals something disturbing, way more disturbing than random grandfather-grandson dysfunction. Because Rick's not just following the cycle, he's perfecting it. Every random adventure, every time he's erased Morty's memory, every moment where he's shown just enough kindness to keep the kid hooked, it's all part of a deliberate pattern. Remember in Rick Potion 9 when Rick completely destroyed their reality and then just moved them to a new one? Everyone thinks that was just Rick being reckless. But what if it wasn't? What if watching Morty bury his own corpse was intentional? A calculated trauma designed to make the kid accept that nothing matters, that he's replaceable, that only Rick can navigate the chaos? And here's where it gets really twisted. Even the show's writers hinted at this in a forgotten interview, confirming what was found in Rick's schematics. The love potion wasn't an accident. They subtly acknowledged that Rick's failures often serve deeper psychological purposes. The evidence was hiding in plain sight this whole time. The psychological profiles Rick's been updating after each adventure tell the real story. Notes about Morty's progress. Charts tracking the kid's emotional dependency levels. Rick's been studying Morty this whole time. The evidence is all there, hidden in plain sight across multiple episodes, but you have to know where to look, and more importantly, you have to be willing to see Rick for what he really is. Alright, let's show you something that's gonna make your skin crawl. In Rick's encrypted files, there's this document titled Morty Psychological Conditioning Phase Implementation Schedule, and when cross-referenced with their actual adventures, guys, every single traumatic event Morty has experienced was planned. Take Morty's mind blowers. Everyone thought Rick was just casually erasing Morty's bad memories to be, what? Merciful. But look at which memories he chose to erase. It wasn't random trauma, it was specifically targeting moments where Rick showed weakness, where Morty gained confidence, or where the kids started to question Rick's authority. The memory of Morty successfully standing up to him? Gone. The time the kids solved a problem without Rick's help? Erased. That moment where Morty caught Rick crying and realized his grandfather wasn't invincible? Wiped clean. But here's the really sick part. Rick left all the memories where Morty failed, where the kid looked stupid, where he needed Rick to save him. Rick's been curating Morty's self-image, deleting evidence of the kid's competence while preserving every moment of inadequacy. And those hundreds of memory wiping sessions, they weren't mercy, they were maintenance. Like defragmenting a hard drive, but the hard drive is Morty's brain, and Rick's deleting the files that threaten his control. But that's not even the worst part, because there's a note in Rick's files from after that episode. Want to know what it said? Subject showing concerning levels of self-awareness. Recommend accelerating Phase 3 protocols. Phase 3, you guys, there were phases. This isn't random abuse, it's a systematic program with objectives, timelines, and success metrics. And Morty was just sitting there, completely unaware that his own grandfather was running psychological experiments on him. What happened next was even more calculated than anyone realized. So after finding those files, the pattern of their adventures looks completely different. And that's when something becomes visible that's genuinely sickening. Rick hasn't just been traumatizing Morty, he's been systematically isolating the kid from anyone who could help. Look at Big Trouble in Little Sanchez. Everyone remembers Tiny Rick, right? But what actually happened there? Rick became a teenager, inserted himself into Morty's world, Morty's school, and made himself the coolest person there. Suddenly, all of Morty's classmates thought his grandfather was amazing, and the kid looked like, well, like the awkward grandson whose cool grandpa was showing him up. But here's what's easy to miss the first time. When Tiny Rick started crying for help, when his real personality started breaking through, who ignored him? Morty. The kid was so caught up in finally being cool by association that he dismissed Rick's genuine distress. And the worst part? Rick planned that. In his files, there's a note, successfully demonstrated to subject that his social connections are superficial. Subject now believes he cannot trust his own judgment about others' emotional states. Recommend leveraging this insecurity in future scenarios. Rick wanted Morty to fail him in that moment. He wanted the kid to feel guilty about ignoring Rick's cries for help, because it would make Morty doubt his ability to read people, to trust his instincts about when someone needs help. But wait, it gets worse. Because Rick's not just destroying Morty's relationships with other people, he's positioning himself as the kid's only reliable connection, and he does this through what the files call calculated heroics. Remember A Wrinkle in Time? Rick literally split into 64 pieces just to save Morty's life. For years, viewers held on to that moment as proof that, deep down, Rick really does care about his grandson. It was one of the few times it felt like maybe Morty actually mattered to him. But guess what's in Rick's psychological profiles? A note dated right after that episode, emergency intervention successful. Subject now demonstrates increased emotional dependency following life-threatening scenario. Recommend occasional heroic gestures to maintain attachment while minimizing frequency to preserve impact. Rick was studying Morty's reaction to being saved, that moment of genuine gratitude and love the kid felt. Rick was measuring it, figuring out exactly how much fake heroism he needed to keep Morty loyal while still maintaining the abuse. And it worked, didn't it? Every time Rick put Morty in danger and then rescued him, every time he showed just a glimpse of caring, Morty filed it away as evidence that Rick really loved him underneath all the cruelty. But those moments weren't proof of Rick's love. They were calculated doses of positive reinforcement, designed to create what psychologists call trauma bonding. The victim becomes addicted to the rare moments of kindness from their abuser, and those moments become more powerful than constant love from healthy people would be. Now here's where this gets really dark, because it's not just about controlling Morty's memories or manipulating his relationships. Rick has been editing reality itself to maintain his psychological control over the kid. Think about Rick Potion 9. We all know the story. Love potion goes wrong, world ends, they jump to a new dimension. But Rick's planning documents for that adventure reveal something horrifying. The love potion was designed to fail. There's a note in his files, subject requires existential trauma to complete dependency conditioning. Recommend scenario involving dimensional displacement and symbolic death rebirth sequence. Expected outcome, complete severing of subject's attachment to fixed identity/reality. Rick planned for them to abandon their reality. He wanted Morty to watch everyone the kid knew turn into monsters. He wanted Morty to experience the horror of burying his own corpse, because that trauma would teach the kid that nothing is permanent, nothing is real, and the only constant in his life is Rick. And the way Rick delivered that lesson, nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, everybody's gonna die. Come watch TV? He wasn't just being nihilistic, he was programming Morty with a worldview that would make the kid more dependent on him. If nothing matters, if reality is just something you can abandon when it gets inconvenient, then why would Morty ever try to build connections or independence? Why fight for anything when Rick can just portal them to a new dimension if things get too uncomfortable? But the most disturbing thing in the files was a document labeled Long-Term Behavioral Outcomes Evil Morty Case Study. You guys, Rick has been studying Evil Morty this whole time, not as an enemy to defeat, but as a successful test case. Evil Morty isn't some anomaly, he's the intended outcome of Rick's psychological conditioning program. The file contains detailed analysis of what Rick calls Subject M', and how prolonged exposure to standard protocols resulted in complete psychological reconstruction and role reversal. Rick's proud of creating Evil Morty, he sees him as proof that his methods work. And there's a comparison chart. Subject M' achievement metrics versus Subject MC137 progress tracking. Rick's been comparing Morty's psychological development to Evil Morty's, monitoring how close the kid is to achieving the same breakthrough. What Rick calls a breakthrough, we'd call becoming a monster. But that's the point, isn't it? Rick's not trying to help Morty grow or become independent. He's trying to break the kid down completely and rebuild him as either a perfect victim who never questions Rick, or a perfect predator who thinks like Rick does. And according to Rick's charts, Morty's right on schedule. Alright, you guys. This is the part that's going to mess with your heads, because everything we just revealed, all that evidence of systematic abuse, all those files proving Rick's been manipulating Morty, that's not even the real revelation. The real revelation is why Rick's doing it. And it's so much worse than just being a narcissistic sociopath who wants control. The real files have been found, the ones hidden behind triple encryption, the ones Rick thought nobody would ever access, and they tell a completely different story about Rick Sanchez and what he's actually trying to accomplish. See, Rick's not just running psychological experiments for fun. He's not even doing it because he's afraid of abandonment, though that's part of it. Rick is trying to solve what he calls the attachment problem, and his solution involves systematically creating the perfect companion who can never leave him. In these deeper files, there's a research proposal titled Project Eternal Morty, Creating Sustainable Codependent Attachment Through Controlled Trauma Cycles. And guys, it's not just about Morty, it's about creating a template for the perfect victim that can be replicated across dimensions. Rick has been testing different psychological conditioning methods on hundreds of Mortys across the multiverse. Each one gets a slightly different treatment protocol, and he's been measuring the results. Which types of trauma create dependency versus rebellion? Which memory editing techniques produce long-term compliance? How much fake affection is needed to maintain trauma bonds without creating genuine confidence? Morty isn't Rick's grandson. The kid's his favorite lab rat. But here's the part that's genuinely disturbing. The end game isn't just to keep Morty as a compliant sidekick. Rick's ultimate goal is to create a Morty so psychologically broken and rebuilt in his image that the kid will eventually become him. Not evil Morty who rejected Rick's control, but a Morty who embraces it, who becomes the next Rick in the cycle. Rick calls it psychological succession protocol. The idea is that once Morty's completely broken down and rebuilt according to Rick's specifications, the kid will be ready to take over Rick's role while Rick moves on to bigger projects. And then Morty will find his own Morty to torture, continuing the cycle forever. It's not just abuse, it's not just control. Rick is trying to create an infinite army of himself, spreading across the multiverse, each generation more perfectly conditioned than the last. And the most horrifying part, according to Rick's progress reports, it's working. Morty's psychological profile shows the kid is developing acceptable levels of emotional detachment and promising increases in manipulative thinking patterns. Morty's becoming more like Rick, and the kid doesn't even realize it's happening. So, where does that leave Morty? The evidence shows a kid sitting in Rick's garage, surrounded by all the tools Rick's used to break him apart and put him back together in Rick's image. Every stutter, every "oh geez," every moment of anxiety, it's all been carefully cultivated. Morty's personality isn't even his own anymore. It's the result of years of systematic psychological conditioning. And you know what the worst part is? Even if Morty discovered all this evidence, even if the kid had all the proof right in front of him, the psychological profiles suggest he still couldn't bring himself to just walk away. Because that's how trauma bonding works, isn't it? The knowledge doesn't make you free, it just makes the prison more visible. Morty has spent so many years believing that somewhere underneath all the cruelty, Rick actually cared about him. That all the pain was worth it because at least he mattered to someone, even if Rick couldn't show it properly. But the files prove that was never true. Morty never mattered as a person. The kid only mattered as a project. Rick doesn't love Morty. He loves what he's made the kid into. And the sickest part is that what Rick's made Morty into isn't even Morty anymore. It's just Rick's idealized version of the perfect victim, programmed to think and feel exactly what Rick wants him to think and feel. But here's the thing, and maybe this represents the last bit of the real Morty before Rick's conditioning completely takes over. Just because someone can see the cage doesn't mean they know how to get out of it. The trauma bonds run too deep, the programming is too sophisticated, and maybe Morty's already too much like Rick to even want to escape anymore. Think about it. Look at what's happening right now. Someone's analyzing psychological data, manipulating information to create an emotional response, turning trauma into content. Does that sound familiar? This investigation is using Rick's own methods, thinking like Rick thinks, presenting evidence the way Rick would present it. Maybe Morty's not Rick's victim anymore. Maybe the kid's already Rick's successor and just doesn't want to admit it. Which brings us to something even more disturbing, discovered in those files. Rick's been keeping profiles on all of you, everyone who watches these videos, everyone who engages with Morty fiction content. He's been studying how people respond to trauma narratives, how they connect with victims, how they process evidence of psychological abuse. And the data suggests that some of you are starting to show the same patterns Morty did in the early stages. The same fascination with dysfunction, the same attraction to dark psychological dynamics, the same need to understand the abuser's methods. What if this whole channel isn't just someone processing Morty's trauma? What if it's a What if it's the next phase of Rick's experiment using Morty's conditioned responses to study your reactions to figure out how Rick's psychological manipulation techniques work on a broader scale? What if Rick isn't just creating the perfect victim, but the perfect audience for victims? People so fascinated by psychological abuse that they'll watch it, analyze it, even celebrate it without realizing they're being conditioned themselves? The evidence doesn't provide clear answers anymore. We don't know what's real, what's conditioning, or what's just paranoid conspiracy theories, because that's what Rick's programming does. It makes you question everything, including your own capacity to question things. But maybe that's the point, isn't it? Perfect control means the victim never even knows where the cage ends and their own thoughts begin. Maybe Rick's greatest achievement isn't creating evil Morty or conditioning our Morty into his successor. Maybe it's creating a whole audience of people who are so invested in understanding psychological manipulation that they don't notice when it's happening to them. So here's the question for you. Are you watching this because you want to help victims of abuse, or because you're fascinated by the methods of the abuser? Are you rooting for Morty to break free from Rick's control, or are you secretly impressed by how sophisticated Rick's psychological torture really is? Think about that, and then think about whether the answer scares you as much as it should. Because if Rick's right about human nature, if he's right that everyone secretly admires the predator more than they pity the prey, then maybe we're all already more like him than we want to admit. And maybe that was his plan all along. So now you've seen the evidence. You've heard what Rick's done to Morty, but here's the part you're not ready for. If Rick's been tracking Morty's reactions this whole time, then maybe he's been tracking yours too. Look at how you've been feeling while watching this. Are you angry for Morty, or are you secretly impressed by Rick's precision? Drop your answer in the comments right now, but know this. If you hesitate, if you can't decide, maybe Rick's experiment on you is already working. And in the next videos, we're showing you the one piece of evidence that proves Rick's manipulation isn't just fiction, it's happening right now.